Okay, welcome to a new week in our class on developing or creating an online course. This is November 5th through the 10th, and that's of course what we'll be learning about is how to create this online course. In D2L is the focus for this next part of the assignment, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But first, wanted to recap on some of the things we've been talking about in the past week on just tips for interacting from synchronous learning. Swap the displays here to get this working right. Okay, strategies for interaction during synchronous learning and communication. So we had a good discussion last week, and thank you for your contributions to that discussion about synchronous learning. I like what we talked about. I think it's important to think about being a good teacher while you're in a live session online with students. Now, the majority of interaction online at this point is actually not synchronous. In general, you'll find a lot more interaction that is asynchronous. And that's kind of what we're developing with the learning management system, although it will incorporate some synchronous learning as well. But anyway, it's important to think about synchronous learning and communication as well, of course, because that's what we've been doing. So just a couple of tips. Now, some of these are covered in the discussion that we had last week. Some are not, but I think that this idea of social presence that we talked about earlier in the semester really comes back to help us think about this, especially in synchronous learning. So things like prompt communication. And one thing about synchronous learning is that it really allows for prompt communication in ways that asynchronous learning can't. You can really respond, ask questions, and do those types of things. Although, as many of you mentioned, sometimes your students don't feel like they can ask those questions. Maybe they feel like they'll be interrupting too much. But it's important that they know that they can. Another thing to enhance social presence, another thing that you can do is share personal stories and experiences. You can show or share your emotions like humor, excitement. Emoticons can even help with that in the chat box. The way that we can do that is just, to show those emotions, to show happiness when we're talking about something that might make us happy, or to show maybe share some humor, which can be an emotion in and of itself. And then, of course, using student names in communication. I like what we've talked about, too, in class, about building relationships with students. And these things really help to do that as we think about enhancing our social presence as we communicate synchronously with a group. Immediacy is another related concept that has to do with a lot with social presence, but it's a little bit different. For instance, immediacy means having relevant gestures, meaning with your hands. Maybe if you like to talk with your hands, maybe you're one of those people. Vocal variety, giving a little bit of vocal variety in your voice, making sure that you vary your voice from high to low, speed up, slow down, that type of thing can really help to support students paying attention to your lessons online. So if there is no vocal variety or any gestures or those kinds, smiling is one of those things as well, then it might be harder for students to sit in an empty room with a computer screen and pay attention to that screen. So these are some things that will help to support the focus among students. Another one is asking questions, right? We talk about questions. There's a picture there with a professor asking a question maybe. And giving adequate wait time. So wait time is something that some teachers feel makes them uncomfortable, right? You ask a question and you hear the crickets chirping maybe, and you're a little uncomfortable with waiting until somebody comes up with an answer. But I think a lot of people actually need time to think about the answer that they would like to give in the right way before they're willing to raise their hand, so to speak, or whatever the equivalent is in a synchronous learning system, and respond. So you can ask questions about the content and also about the lesson, right? You can ask about what this concept is that you're learning about or teaching about, but you can also ask questions about the lesson itself, like how is the lesson going? Do I need to speed up a little bit? Do I need to slow down a little bit for you? And then, of course, discussions are another part of this. You can have discussion activities that support more immediacy as well. So student interaction. So supporting student interaction while in a synchronous session can be done with some tools as well. And there are tools available in some of these synchronous commercial synchronous learning tools that are out there, such as breakout rooms. So what a breakout room basically is it takes the class and breaks them into groups, and then they have their own room that they go to. So the instructor can select what size the groups are, and what room they should, how many students should be in, how many students should be in each group, and then they go to different rooms and they have a discussion about a specific topic. Now these can work pretty well as long as they are very structured, as long as students know what to do, as long as they don't get to the room and say, what were we supposed to do with this? So make it clear and repeat instructions on what students should do while in breakout rooms and how long they get to be in those rooms as well. Brainstorming, you can do a lot of brainstorming online to get students to contribute some ideas or concepts, and that could be done in breakout rooms or as part of a whole class session. Case studies, meaning that you introduce some type of real world situation and ask students to respond to that situation. There are polling options in many of these synchronous commercial tools that allow you to invite the class to respond to a poll, and then it shows the results, which is nice. And you could use even an outside of the synchronous tool polling system, such as Poll Everywhere, and receive answers as well. Consensus building, that's again a discussion where you're trying to build some kind of consensus on an issue or topic. A debate, and even student presentations could be supported within a full class, a synchronous class. So again, you could have it so that students get to take over. They're assigned some type of structured activity that they're supposed to present on back to you, much like you might do in a face-to-face class where students might have a presentation assignment, but this would be done online. Now, of course, it takes a little bit more work for them to get used to that system, to be willing to present in that type of system, but it has been done. So those are just some more strategies for interaction that I think are key when we think about synchronous learning and communication. All right, so let's take a look at our activities for this week. You'll be reading in the textbook chapter 8. So supporting learners with special needs, and that will come back on the discussion board. There's a lot to think about with supporting learners with special needs, and one concept or one concern that I've heard recently in our department is that maybe education is getting to be too close to support, or has a lot of resources to support people with special needs. And if you look in every school, there's a teacher designed or somebody who has the task of supporting learners with special needs almost everywhere. But that not a lot of resources are going to our gifted students, those who have special needs in that way. And I think that is true. That's a valid concern, I think, in education right now, is that there are special needs learners with their needs often being met. And hopefully they are being met, of course, but oftentimes it's the learners that have special needs in the other way that are maybe gifted or maybe above the level of the general class whose needs are not being met for that in a lot of ways. And I think there's some research that shows that students getting bored of school because of that, and not enjoying the experience, not being challenged enough to really make a difference in life. So that's just a side note. I've heard that recently, but anyway, you'll be reading about supporting learners with special needs, and on the discussion for this week, you'll talk about how can distance instructors set things up to support learners with special needs in the following teaching and learning situations. So, and what it's asking about here is special needs such as difficulty speaking, hearing, visual impairments, and physical impairments. And I think it's important that we talk about this for online learning. Does online learning really work for people with special needs, or could it work? Maybe it doesn't work now, but what could we do to make it work for learners with special needs? That's kind of the topic for the discussion this week. And then presentations that you'll watch are about developing activities for online learning. So it talks about Brightspace, or D2L, which is the one that you'll want to certainly pay attention to. It also gives some Google Classroom instruction. That will come later. I believe we'll use Google Classroom for our second LMS project, which will be very similar to the first. In fact, you'll be taking the same activities and putting them from D2L into Google Classroom. And then I also have a section up there for Moodle in case you're interested. So the Moodle part is sort of in case you're interested. We did use that last time I taught this class, But I think right now, with the advent of Google Classroom and a lot of adoption in K-12 schools of Google Classroom, that we're going to use Google Classroom this time. Unless you have a compelling reason to use Moodle, I will allow you to use Moodle if you want to as the second learning management system. But let me know if you have a compelling reason to do so, or if you have access to Moodle. The reason why you might want to do so is if you have a school district that maybe is thinking about adopting or has adopted Moodle. It's actually the most popular open source learning management system out there. So it's actually pretty popular to use, and I think it's used more internationally and in foreign locations to us, but it's also popular here as well. So those are the presentations. Take a look at those, learn what you can about developing a course in D2L and Google Classroom for sure. And then you'll be part of the discussion board. Now, what you're working toward is actually a learning management system assignment. And so it's important to know about that as well. Let me pull up a presentation about that so I can go through the assignment with you and get you started on this project. All right, so learning management system. So the assignment basically is you're building 1 week of a course in a learning management system. Think about the course that you're in right now, and that's what you're looking at doing. But I'm asking you to include at least one of each of the following items in the week of activities. And although a real course would not all, necessarily include all of these in every week of instruction, but yeah, you're going to start with learning objectives. You're going to state the learning objective for this week. And remember, learning objectives are very specific. They're kind of like goals. They're specific, measurable, and attainable. The SMART goals, that's a good way to think about these, but they're very specific to what the learner should be able to do once they have received this instruction. There are going to be readings, probably. I mean, a lot of learning management system assignments have readings in their assignments, or reading/viewing assignments, I should say, because maybe a reading is not developmentally appropriate. So maybe it's a video to watch or some kind of content to be taken in. I'm going to require you to include a live session or a synchronous session. Now, this doesn't have to be planned. Instead, the tool within the LMS must be set up to do a live session. So for instance, in Brightspace, we have Collaborate, which is a tool that you can set up to create a live session. And you can just say, we're going to meet at 9 a.m. on Wednesday and do a live session. And just go through and set up that tool for the live session, and you'll be able to do it. And at least one discussion forum with clear directions, etiquette, and response instructions. Okay, so a discussion forum like the ones we've been doing in this class, you should include clear directions. Etiquette is talking about just how one should behave within discussion boards. I think it's important, at least for the initial discussion in a class, to talk about how we should behave and why we should behave certain ways, and what are some do's and don'ts of posting on this discussion board. So I'll look for a little bit of that in the discussion that you post. And again, that discussion should be about what's going on in the course. What's the content for your course? What's the learning objective for your course? All of these activities should align to the learning objective. There needs to be alignment between the activities and the objectives. Assignments to submit. So you're going to include at least one assignment with clear instructions for online students on what they should submit for that week. Again, an assignment is a way to assess student learning, and it's also a way to provide student interaction and engagement. At least one quiz with at least 10 questions of different types. So you're going to create a quiz in Brightspace as well, and require students to become involved in that. So these assignments and quiz, or this assignment and quiz, I should say that there's just one assignment required, but you could have more than one if you want to, are assessment items that should align with the learning objective, and the readings, the discussion, and everything else should really align with the learning objective. What is the learning objective? It should all support that objective for the students. And then you're also going to have recorded presentation done by you. This can be the same presentations you recorded for your flipped classroom. So in other words, I'm not going to require you to record a new presentation that has to do with the learning objective. Instead, I'll ask you just to go ahead and post your flipped classroom recordings, because I know that you already know how to record yourself and make a presentation for potential students. And so just post it on the discussion or on the in D2L in that week. Now, so this one does not have to necessarily be aligned with the learning objectives. And then the goal with this assignment is to have you learn the tools of the LMS, but also make the activities coherent so that an actual student could log in, go through the activities, and learn. So the way to do it is really to make it so it's clear what students should do throughout each part of the assignment. And like I say, the easiest audience for this course is the high school, college, or higher level students, since these students will be able to navigate through the course independently. So if you're doing a presentation for somebody besides the high school, college level student, it might be harder for them to actually navigate through the system. And that's kind of, I think I want you to focus on this audience if you can. I know that many of you do not plan or don't teach to this level of student, but it's important to think about that's the most likely audience for distance and online learning. I suppose if you have a good reason to stay with younger students, you can, but you can design the activities for an elementary, like it says here, or middle school student audience, and assume that they will have a parent to help them navigate the course and complete the activities. So that's important. Now, remember to present the items chronologically for the student, or I should say in order, so that from a student's perspective it is clear what they should do during the current week. So in other words, post the item that they're supposed to do first, and then post the next item that they're supposed to do right after that, and so forth until the week is finished. All right, so it's not just to develop the course in D2L that you need to do. You actually need to submit a document with some supplemental information in the appropriate box as well. So that tells me that you are done, and that also gives me an explanation of what your course is about. So you're going to describe your target audience, provide a written summary of the week's activities in just a few paragraphs, and describe the activities that you as a teacher would do during the week in order to support student learning. For instance, if there's a live session during that week, obviously you would log into that live session and present on these 5 items. If there are readings during the week, then maybe you don't do too much with that, but assess them. Or if there's a quiz, you might check the quiz scores and make sure that students are gaining what they are supposed to gain from the knowledge that they're supposed to get. If there are other items that students are supposed to do, you would talk about what you as a teacher would need to do to respond to those items. Like an assignment, for instance, you talk about how you would give feedback to students about that assignment, grade them, and so forth. So that's what you'll create. There's supplemental information and there's course activities in the LMS in the rubric for this assignment. And so we'll talk about whether you specified the target audience. Did you give a written summary of the week's activities? Did you talk about what your job would be during the week as a teacher? And then for the LMS course activities, are they all present and adequate and so forth? All right, so just as a review, a learning management system is a software application for the administration, documentation, tracking, reporting, and delivery of e-learning education courses or training programs. And again, we have lots of learning management systems available to us. We have things like Moodle, Google Classroom, D2L, Sakai is another one that I think of, Live Text, Canvas. There are a whole bunch of learning management systems out there. And what I like about I like that we have a lot of choices out there, but usually what happens is an administration group or individual, or I guess it would be committee most likely, has chosen one for you to use. And you often, as an instructor, don't get much choice on which LMS you get to use. You just follow whatever one has been adopted by your institution. And one movement that's going on in education right now is this LMS versus PLE. So PLE stands for Personal or Professional Learning Environment, and LMS stands for Learning Management System. A learning management system is, from what critics would say, a closed system. It's something that nobody but those who are allowed in can get in. Students and teacher only can get in. And this leads to some problems educationally, I think, in some ways, because let's say that, well, for instance, this class, after the semester is over, you will not be able to access the class in D2L anymore after a certain amount of time. Therefore, if you have materials that you would like to go back to and maybe access again, you don't have that. You can't do that. And so a PLE is like a personal learning environment where maybe you create, instead of an LMS inside D2L, you create something on a website or something that is open, and you allow people to access this thing. And they access it, all your students can access it, but guess what? Other people can access this course as well, whoever wants to. And it kind of follows this open educational initiative or open educational resources initiative, in which you can learn by, for free. You can learn a lot just by accessing open educational resources that are out there. So that's been a critique, I think, of a learning management system, is that it's not very open for anyone to view. And once you are in the course, it's fine because you can access things. But once the course is over, you can no longer access those materials, which may be useful to you in the future. So, and then there's this important item called the course learning plan. This is something that I published an article on a while ago with a couple of other colleagues. The course learning plan. So if you take a look at these possible course organization schemes, in a lot of learning management systems, they kind of tend to make you want to go to the left here, where there's a tab maybe for assignments, there's another tab for quizzes, there's another tab for discussions, and there's another one for files. And you have to go to each one to be able to view what assignments might be due this week or next week. So you have to first go to assignments when you log in during the week and say, okay, what assignments are due this week? Oh, there's this assignment due this week. And you go to quizzes next and you say, oh, well, there's no quiz due this week. And then you go to discussions after that. And you're like, okay, there is a discussion for this week. We need to do that. And then files and so forth. And that's a very inefficient way to make students navigate through a learning management system. And so virtually all learning management systems over the past few years have focused more on the scheme on the right, which organizes course activities by dates. And you see an example of this in my class right now, right? Because you have November 5th through the 10th, which is this week. And it lists all of the assignments, quizzes, discussions, files, etc. I mean, it could be more things that are due during that week. And this is a much better organization scheme. And it's kind of, to me, it's kind of common sense, but a while ago we had to really talk about this in our literature. We had to talk about how a course learning plan is the best way to go, and that's the scheme on the right here. For dates, organize things by dates. Put all assignments, quizzes, discussions, doesn't matter what the type of activity it is, put it under the same week so that students know what to do during that week and they're not confused. We don't want students using up their mental resources just to try to figure out what to do during the week. Instead, we want it to be very clear what they should do and use their mental resources to think about the course content that they're supposed to be learning. So yeah, we have various learning management systems. In this case, we're going to be using D2L for the first learning management system assignment, and then Google Classroom for the second one. And we'll talk more about D2L activities in just a minute. But just a few parting tips I think we'll talk about is to make sure that you give clear directions in your assignment. Make sure it's very clear to someone by reading or maybe even watching an intro video like this one what to do during that week. And instructional materials as well should be very clear. It should talk about, they should be very clear to understand and use. You can't have any lack of clarity in distance learning in an LMS like this, where you don't have options to clarify or make clear as you might in a face-to-face class. And then make sure you support active student-centered learning. That means make sure that students are actively involved. So readings, yes, they're good. Readings and watching videos and so forth, yeah, they're good. But you don't know for sure if the student read that thing. So maybe there's an assignment you can assign which supports this active learning, where students can do something to show their learning. That's important, I think, for online learning. It becomes more important in that way. You can't just expect to sit and get, or spray and pray and remember what I say, is what one of my colleagues used to talk about. You need to have some active student-centered learning going on. And this is talking about mental activity. Enhanced social presence is another one. We just talked about social presence, supporting humor, supporting questions, supporting these types of things that will hopefully enhance your presence and availability for communication with students. And then finally, quality assessment. That just means making sure that that aligns with your learning objective, and that it aligns also with real world ideas of what students should be learning. So that's a little intro on learning management systems and on the activities for this class.